Welcome to Project Healthy Schools. This is Lesson 5, Get the Beat. Objectives for Lesson 5 are: students will be able to understand the concepts of beats per minute as a measure of aerobic activity, evaluate different physical activities to determine which strengthen the heart muscle, and understand the importance of getting at least 60 minutes of physical activity on most days. Vocabulary for this lesson: physical activity, heart rate, pulse, hypothesis, resting heart rate, and aerobic exercise. Material students will need is simply a sticky note or a scrap of paper. Hello everybody and welcome back to Project Healthy Schools. Before we get going on Lesson 5, let's talk about what we talked about in Lesson 4. We talked a lot about sugar. We talked about how to limit sugar from our diet. We talked about how sugary foods provide a lot of empty calories. We talked about the nutrition facts label and how to interpret some of the information on there. And we even made a healthy drink using the carbonated water and the fruit juice. So hopefully you remember that as we move on. Today, what we're going to be talking a lot about is the heart. The title of today's lesson is Get the Beat. So we're going to be talking a lot about our heart and some other things involved with that. All right, so first let's talk a little bit about the heart. Hopefully we've heard of that. It's a very important organ in our body. Does anybody know what kind of tissue the heart is made up of? Now, we have lots of different kinds of tissues in our body. Does anybody know? Well, the answer is it's muscular tissue. It's like a muscle, just like all other muscles that we think of. Now, normally we think of things like our bicep muscle or muscles in our body that we can see, but the heart is actually a muscle. And just like our other muscles, it needs to be exercised to become stronger. So we can't exactly we can't lift weights necessarily to directly make our heart stronger. But what we need to do is make it beat faster and beat harder, and that's how we strengthen the heart muscle. We're going to talk more about that later. Does anybody know how big our heart is? Like, what's the size of your heart? Well, your heart is about the size of your fist. Maybe you've heard that before. And everybody's fist is different. A kid's fist is obviously smaller than an adult's fist. So our heart does grow until adulthood, and our heart is about the size of our fist, and it's located pretty much dead center in our chest, just slightly to the left in this area. All right? Now, the functions of our heart are really important. So what does the heart muscle help us do? Well, the heart pumps blood. It's the main pump, and it uses the blood in our body to redistribute it. It gathers it up, it reoxygenates it, and then it redistributes it throughout the body. So it's a major pump in our body that keeps our body alive. So it's the center of the body's transit system. It refreshes the cells with oxygen and energy, and it takes away the waste and the carbon dioxide. So it constantly is moving the blood in and out of our body, rejuvenating and replenishing all the parts of our body that need it. So it's constantly working, and it's a very, very important organ. So on average, the heart beats between 60 and 100 beats per minute. That depends on a lot of things. It depends on each individual. But let's do a quick math problem. Let's all suppose that the heart beats once every second for 60 beats per minute. So we know that there are 60 minutes in an hour, and there are 24 hours in a day. So if we multiply 60 minutes times 24 hours, we get 1,440 minutes per day. So if the heart beats once every second for 1,440 minutes per day, how many times does the heart beat every day? Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure out this math problem, and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. How did that math problem go? Well, we kind of had figured out already that how many minutes are in a whole entire day. That's probably the hardest part of the problem. 1,440 minutes, and if the heart beats 60 times per minute, we just multiply those two together, which gives us 144,000 beats per day. All right, so that's a great that's a great example of how often or how much our heart is working for us every single day, because if it doesn't beat, then we don't live. So that shows you how important the heart is, and how often it has to beat to keep us alive. So because our heart has to work so hard, it has to constantly keep beating to keep us healthy, it's important that we strengthen that heart and that muscle, just like we would want to strengthen anything else. So how do we build a strong heart? Now, if I wanted to build any other muscle, I would isolate maybe that with a certain kind of exercise or a weight exercise. Like we all think of maybe bicep curls, where I want to use a weight to make my biceps strong, but we can't really do that with our heart. So does anybody know how we would build our heart muscle? Well, to make it work and to make it get stronger, we need the heart to beat faster. And to do that, we need to do physical activity. We need to increase the rate that the heart is beating. So if we do that and we increase it and we sustain that for more than 10 minutes, we're going to strengthen the heart muscle. Therefore, when the heart is at rest and it's not working, it doesn't have to work as hard to continue to do the basics that we need it to do, just to make those beats per minute to circulate our blood. So the more we work out, the more we move, and the higher that we get that heart rate and we make it get stronger, the less it's going to have to work in the long run to keep us alive and healthy. All right? So to do that, we want to get physical activity. And I'm sure you've heard of that, but that's going to be a big topic of today's conversation. It's one of our vocab words. So let's talk about what physical activity is. Well, physical activity, we're going to define as the movement of the body that increases energy expenditure. Significant health benefits can be obtained by including 60 minutes of physical activity every day. So what are some of the significant benefits of being physically active? What are some of your favorite ways to be physically active? A couple things to think about. Well, the benefits include it reduces our blood pressure, it reduces our risk of heart disease, it increases our energy levels, we get better sleep when we exercise, we get better food digestion, it decreases stress, anxiety, and depression, it improves your brain function, helps you do better in school, can improve your mood and your attitude, it improves your concentration, it can help your self-esteem, and it can improve your athletic ability. So there are a lot of benefits to being physically active, as you can see. To my second question, what are some of your favorite physical activities? And this kind of goes back to our SMART goals lesson, is setting realistic goals and we want to be physically active, but we want to find things that we like to do. We want to find things that we enjoy to do as physical activity. And there are a lot of things outside of maybe some of the things we just normally think of. It's not just about getting on a treadmill and jogging. There's a lot of ways to be physically active and to get our heart rate up. So maybe think of a couple that are your favorite. What's your favorite way to exercise and get your heart rate up? So as we move into our first activity for today, we have a couple more vocab words to go over. So once again, let's talk about heart rate and pulse. How do we define those things? Well, heart rate and pulse are the same thing. Heart rate or pulse is a measure of how many beats per minute our heart pumps to meet the oxygen and energy demands of our body. But what is a hypothesis? Well, hopefully from science, you've heard of the word hypothesis. The definition of a hypothesis is an educated guess about what you think will happen based on your observations. So we're going to do a little bit of an experiment here in a minute, but there's a little bit of prep that we need to do first. All right, but the first thing I want you to think about is this. So get out your sticky note or your piece of scratch paper now, and I want you to write down these 4 things. I want you to write down screen time, walking, jumping jacks, and high knees. Now I'm going to kind of go over what those things look like. But the hypothesis that we want to try to make is which one of these is going to raise our heart rate the most. All right, now screen time is kind of what you're doing right now. You're watching a screen and just sitting there. So I'm just kind of giving you a hint that's probably going to be the lowest. But then we have 3 other movements. And the hypothesis, what we're really trying to figure out is which one of these is going to raise our heart rate the most. So the experiment we're going to do here shortly is going to show us how to measure that. So go ahead and make sure you have those written down on a piece of scrap paper. And then we're going to talk about how to find your pulse before we get started. So to be able to do our activity for today, we're going to need to be able to find our pulse. And I'm going to show you there's several ways to find your pulse, and there's several different parts of your body where it's easy to feel where your pulse is. Okay, we're going to focus on 2 today, or maybe the easiest ways to do it. The first one we're going to talk about is the carotid pulse. Now, the carotid pulse is one of the biggest arteries in our body, and that's going to be on our neck. Now, just to remind you, a pulse is where we feel the blood pumping through our arteries, and our arteries are some of the main vessels that carry the blood from the heart to other parts of the body, and that's what we're feeling. So we're not necessarily feeling exactly the heart. Now, sometimes if you exercise hard enough, you can put your hand right on your chest, and you might be able to feel your heart beating there. But other times we need to find our pulse in areas where it's maybe easier to do it. So we're going to start with the carotid pulse. So I'm going to show you that in a second. But to find your carotid pulse, you're going to place your index finger on your jawbone. right underneath your ear. All right? So you're gonna place these two fingers on your jawbone right below your earlobe, and you're gonna move then the fingers halfway down the jawbone. So two fingers, find your jawbone directly below your earlobe. You're gonna move halfway between your earlobe and your chin. So about here. Now you're not gonna find your pulse on your jawbone. Now you're gonna move it slightly down to where you feel the soft tissue of your neck. Now you might have to look around a little bit, but this is where you should be able to find your carotid artery. So go ahead and give that a try. Pause the video and see if you can find your carotid pulse. Now let's look at how to find our radial pulse. Now our radial pulse runs along the radius bone, which is in our forearm. So it's going to be on the thumb side. That's the first thing to notice. On the thumb side of your hand, so go ahead and flip your hand so that it's palm up and check for the thumb side. All right, so you're going to put your fingers right at the base of your thumb on the outside portion. You should be able to feel where your radial bone comes into your wrist here. And you're going to slide it slightly up your forearm until you feel a pulse. That's another common way to find your pulse. So before we get started with today's activity, we need to be able to calculate beats per minute. All right, and there's several ways to do that. Now, obviously, the easiest way, or maybe, but it takes a little bit more time, is to actually count the beats per minute by finding your pulse and actually go ahead and count the beats for a total of 60 seconds. So whatever that number would be, you would multiply that by 1 because it's the same as, you're finding exactly what your beats per minute are. Now there's some faster ways to do it. Now we can split that just to save ourselves a little time. You could do it for 30 seconds. Now if you counted, say I counted 32 beats for 30 seconds, well then I would multiply that by 2 because 30 times 2 equals 60, which gives us our 60 seconds for a minute, and that would be my answer. Today what I'm going to recommend you do is we're going to do 15 seconds. Now 15 goes into 64 times, so we need to multiply by 4 to get the total beats per minute. All right, but we're going to do 15 seconds because it's quicker. We can do the quick math, and that'll give us a calculation of what our beats per minute are after each one of our activities. All right, so whatever we get after our 15 seconds, we're going to multiply by 4. That's an important thing to remember as we move into this activity. Okay, for this activity, on your piece of paper or your sticky note, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, we want to have screen time, walking, jumping jacks, high knees, and we're going to figure out what our beats per minute are after doing those activities. So make sure you kind of have that set up and ready to go. Now the first one, since screen time is pretty much what we're doing right now, we're just sitting looking at a screen, we can go right to that. So what we're going to do is measure our pulse for 15 seconds. All right, so either one of the two ways that I showed you, either your radial pulse on your wrist, if that's easier, or your carotid pulse on your neck. But go ahead and find that pulse, and when the 15-second timer starts, you're going to count the beats. Ready? Go. All right, take whatever number that you counted on your pulse and multiply that by 4. The reason we're doing that is because we only did it for 15 seconds. 15 times 4 equals 60 seconds, which will give us a total minute. Now I counted 16 beats in 15 seconds. All right, so I would multiply that by 4, and that's going to give me 64 beats per minute. And that's just my resting heart rate for just standing there or just watching the screen. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is just walking around the room. So make sure you stand up, make sure you have a little bit of room around you. When I say go, the timer on the screen is going to start, and I just want you to walk around the room until you hear the timer stop. Are we ready? Go ahead. All right, jump right to that pulse now, that same pulse point that you found before. Get ready to start counting. When the timer starts, start counting your beats. Okay, take that number that you found in your pulse, multiply by 4. This time I got 18 beats in 15 seconds. So that my walking heart rate went up a little bit. So mine went up to 72. So go ahead and record that on your sheet, do the math, and we'll get ready for our next one. All right, the next thing we're gonna do is jumping jacks. So a little bit more movement now. Hopefully we know what a jumping jack looks like by now, but if not, it looks like this. Feet and hands together, jump, hands apart, hands up, jump, everything's back together. We're gonna do that for 1 minute, and then we're gonna jump right on our pulse and see what that does to our heart rate. Okay, so make sure you have that same amount of room. Get ready to go. We're going for 1 minute. Ready, go. Okay, get right back to that pulse. Here we go. Ready? Count. Okay, our heart rate should be a little higher now. Let's go ahead and calculate what we got. I got 28 beats in that 15 seconds, so I'm going to multiply that by 4. Now my heart rate after my jumping jacks was 112 beats per minute. So as we've noticed, you know, with a little bit of exercise, a little bit of movement, my heart rate has gone up a little bit. All right. Now for the last one, we're going to go to high knees. Now high knees, we're just going to stand in place. All right, and you're just going to really drive your knee up as high as you can. Knee and arm kind of go together. And we're not really moving anywhere, but we are really trying to lift that knee as high as we can. All right, so make sure you're ready and you have some space. All right, we're gonna start the clock once again for 1 minute of high knees. Ready? Go. Okay, go ahead and find your pulse one more time. Find that spot. Get ready for your 15-second timer and start counting now. All right, last time. So I got 25 beats in 15 seconds. So I'm gonna multiply by 4. That's a nice easy one. So that gives me 100 beats per minute for my high knee. So it's a little bit lower. All right, so what was your hypothesis? Which one of these did you think was going to raise it the most? For me, it was jumping jacks. And then after my high knees, it went down a little bit. But both of the exercises raised my heart rate, which is really what we're trying to prove here. Okay, before we move on, I want to give you kind of a fun, special bonus way to check your pulse. Now, this isn't the most practical thing, but it is kind of a fun way to actually see your pulse in action. So all you'll need to do this is a toothpick and a mini, tiny little marshmallow, okay? And so all you're gonna do is you're gonna take your toothpick and you're gonna push it into the marshmallow long ways, but you don't wanna push it all the way through, okay? So this usually works best if you kind of get your heart rate going a little bit, but even if you don't, you'll be able to detect this. So you're gonna really flatten out your hand so it's nice and level. And you're gonna set the marshmallow right on that radial pulse, all right? So once you've been checking for it, hopefully you found it during our activity, and you're just gonna go ahead and balance it there. Now if you come in close, so as you come closer, you can see, if you look closely, the toothpick ticking back and forth as my heart beats. So the purpose of this activity was to show you how exercise affects your heart rate and why physical activity and raising your heart rate is important. As we talked about earlier, to exercise the heart to make it stronger, we need to make it beat faster for time periods. All right, so what kind of exercise is the kind of exercise that gets us out of breath? Remember what we talked about, at least 10 minutes of getting that heart rate to come up, getting ourselves breathing hard. Does anybody know what that kind of exercise is called? Well, that's our next vocabulary word. It's called aerobic exercise, all right? Aerobic exercise is any activity that keeps your body in motion for an extended period of time, 10 minutes or more, and causes your heart and lungs to circulate blood and oxygen more quickly. Things like soccer, jump roping, biking, basketball, and running are all examples of aerobic exercise. So hopefully we understand why this is important. Now what's going to happen if we consistently do that aerobic exercise and we push our hearts to beat faster sometimes? What's going to happen to our resting heart rate? Well, our resting heart rate was pretty much the same as our screen time heart rate, which is because we were sitting and we were resting, we weren't doing very much. But if I raise that level by doing aerobic exercise consistently, what do you think is going to happen to my resting heart rate? Well, it's going to go down. So, you know, it might have been 64, and if I maybe do a little bit more aerobic exercise consistently, it might go down to 60 or 59. And that's a good thing, because as we talked about earlier, our heart needs to beat all of our life. And the less it has to work when we're at rest, the longer it's going to last. And that's the importance of physical activity, aerobic exercise, in getting our heart rates up. So I have something really cool I want to show you. Okay, but first I have a question for you. Are you ready? What weighs more, 5 pounds of muscle or 5 pounds of fat? Well, hopefully you realize that's a trick question. Of course, 5 pounds of muscle and 5 pounds of fat both weigh 5 pounds. So they weigh the same. But do they look the same? Have you ever thought about what 5 pounds of muscle might look like, or 5 pounds of fat? And why is that important? Well, as we exercise, a lot of times we gain a little bit of muscle, and our heart's a muscle, and we make it a little bit stronger. But muscle grows when it gets stronger. So we gain muscle. So therefore we may gain weight when we do that. But oftentimes when we do that, we also lose fat. But muscle takes up a lot less space than fat. It's much more dense. Let me show you. I have a few models to show you here to really represent the difference between 5 pounds of muscle and 5 pounds of fat. So the first model I have is 5 pounds of muscle. Now this is a plastic, but this is a plastic model, but this is, you know, kind of what muscle looks like. It's kind of what it feels like. And unfortunately you can't hold it right now, but it's very dense. It's very heavy for its size. So that's something to keep in mind. As you exercise and you get stronger and you build muscle, you're going to gain some weight. And that's a good weight, because muscle burns calories and muscle takes in nutrients that if you don't have that muscle and you're not moving a lot, will get stored as fat. So having more muscle is going to make it easier to not store fat. Now let me show you the difference. 5 pounds of muscle compared to 5 pounds of fat. Now this weighs the exact same as this. Now it's kind of hard to tell because this one's super dense and it's heavier for its size, but this one's more spread out and it takes up a lot more space. And this is kind of what fat looks like. It's yellow and globby and maybe kind of gross. Now don't think that you need to have some fat in your body. It's okay to have some. You need to have some to kind of keep our bodies regulated and moving and healthy. But we don't want the excess. And when we don't move enough and we bring in more calories than we expend, which we talked about in a previous lesson, we're gonna store this stuff. And it takes up a lot of space and it weighs a lot and it's not good for us, okay? But that's the difference. 5 pounds of muscle, 5 pounds of fat. Well, we're almost done with today's lesson, but before we go, I just want to ask you a few questions. Of course, what did you learn today? We had a lot of information today. Hopefully you learned something about the heart and how important it is to exercise the heart. Maybe you learned how to check your pulse and where to find your pulse. And hopefully you found something that you can share with somebody else. I think that's really important. When you learn something, maybe share it with your family, share it with a friend, but think of something that you learned today and then share it with others. Maybe it's that fun marshmallow trick. I mean, maybe that's just a fun way to teach someone else how to find their pulse. And then also let's think about which PHS goal relates to what we learned today. Well, we talked today a lot about physical activity. And remember, one of our goals in PHS is to get kids like you to be more active and try to get 60 minutes of some moderate to hard physical activity every single day. So that's like kind of the biggest thing we want you to take away from today, and we're really focusing on that physical activity goal. So stay tuned for lesson 6, where we're going to be making a salad using a rainbow of colorful foods. Thanks for being with me today, and I will talk to you soon.